Okay. Okay, I made the title sound more dramatic than it really is, but this is based on two blog posts, a blog post and then a follow-up by a gentleman that was published in 2016 in January. And if you do a Google search, this blog post, the first blog post, which was entitled "Moving Away from HDF5," comes up in any Google search. So I made sounded a little more dramatic, and I hope that in the future, if this comes up, this presentation or a blog post to the same extent will also come up. So I just took screenshots here of in the lower left, what I call reference 1, that's the original blog post from January 30th, 2016. And then he wrote a follow-up later that month on January 30th. And first things first, I think if you haven't read it, definitely go read it, read both. And there are plenty of comments with both of these posts. I think he made an important contribution, just sort of recording his findings, his observations, and sure, talking about now with the benefit of hindsight after 5 years. The first article is a little bit tainted by understandable frustration, and you will read that for yourself. The second article is a little more sober, but I think that doesn't really, I think, diminish its overall value as the voice in the community. And there are not only success stories, there are disappointments out there, and we need to talk about them and do better in the future. For the next 15 minutes, I will try to focus on the good bits, I think, which make this an important contribution, his observations. And the not so good bits, I would say, they are easily spotted by knowledgeable readers. And also, if you really read all the comments, many of them were addressed by commenters. And we should, my suggestion is we should follow up with a blog post of our own. And hey, if you would like to volunteer or join in, let me know and we'll do something. Okay, the reaction at the time, if you look at the dates on these comments, it was sort of, I think, definitely within a 1 month horizon. So the first post got, I believe, 43 comments, and the commenters pointed out certain independent implementations in the existence that were in existence at the time already, because the article claimed that there weren't any, that the HDF5 library at the time was the only one. There were also certain performance claims made that were refuted by some commenters who pointed out some technical mistakes in the implementation, and also some references to HDF success stories. And then the second post, the follow-up, got about 18 comments, and there were lots of, unlike the first post, there are sort of lots of voices, or lots of people raised their hands at pointing out all kinds of alternatives, starting from database management systems, XDIR, which is sort of a YAML binary file combination, ZAR, root, and ASDF. And if you look at the first reference, that first blog post, he has a bulleted list very early in that article where he sort of lists the main issues that they have encountered. And I think interesting enough, if you just think about the last 3 days, we keep talking about them. The high risk of data corruption, bugs and crashes in the HDF5 library and in the wrappers that may have improved a little. I think it has improved. Poor performance in some situations, limited support for parallel access, and I think he meant at the time multi-threaded access or access to Hadoop and Spark and so forth, which were maybe a little more novel at the time. The impossibility, as he states it, to explore data sets with standard Unix and Windows tools, hard dependence on a single implementation of the library, which brings us also thinking about H5 Coro and some of the other activities in the space. That certainly wasn't true exactly at the time, but it's not true today for sure. The high complexity of the specification and the implementation, that's certainly true. However, at some point he makes a statement there, which I think perpetuates a certain myth, which basically goes like this. Well, the HDF5 library is so large, let's say 300,000 lines at the time, because the file format specification is so complex. And that's a myth. That's not true even of those 300,000 lines, let's say. Just a small portion actually deals with the file format specification itself, if you want to think about serialization and deserialization and so forth. The rest really deals with use cases, has nothing to do with the file format, but that seems to be a myth that's out there, and we should dispel that. But I think what should give us pause is his comment that he found, or they found, a degree of opacity of the development.
Oh, Gerd, we lost your voice. I don't know if it is just me or somebody else.
No, we have outages in our areas.
For which you, pardon me?
Last, I think 20 seconds of your voice was lost.
Oh, that seems to be a common occurrence. So I think what gives me pause is this comment of his, the opacity of the development and slow reactivity of the development team being us, the HDF group. And it would be interesting to go back in time and look at help desk interaction, forum posts, and so forth, things that I haven't had the time to do, to just see how these, have they reached out to us, and is it really that we have not reacted, or I can't speak to that. Yeah,
I can speak to it. We will not contact it. We check.
Okay. Okay, good. So we'll, but definitely it's something that should give us pause in general, not only because of this one blog post, but how we see ourselves. Do we think, how can we be sure that people out there see us as we are responsive, responsible, we react to concerns and so forth. So a whole other topic. Anyway, so in this first blog post, his main conclusions were that designing and maintaining, promoting a file format within a community is hard. This article was written in the context of a neuroscience community, but I invite you to go back and read up on the details. And it cannot be reasonably done by a small group of people who need to write software, develop algorithms, and do research. Absolutely. Then, interestingly enough, is this concept of, they seem to have pivoted away, and I'll come back to that later, this idea, well, if you don't do a file format, what do you then do for that community? And their answer was, well, like in a collaborative system, the only thing that you can really control are the interfaces. Think of the World Wide Web or something like that. But then the question is, where does that leave people with who have to ultimately put bytes on disk or into some kind of storage medium? What happens to that and to them? And then, of course, this tension with, there is a very diverse user community. Maybe, again, this is something that has changed a little bit over the last 5 years, the literacy of also researchers with respect to something like Python or MATLAB and so forth. Now, switching over to that second reference. So that second reference was, in a way, I think, published by him in response to the plenty of comments that he got and suggestions. So he then talked a little bit about that it was very important for them also to make a distinction between data creation, analysis, and sharing that brings all kinds of different analysis requirements. And he basically is saying that, yeah, as far as sharing is concerned, HDF works for us and worked for us, but when it comes to supporting access certain use cases, then it turned out to be rather problematic. There's also a comment like that where he says that, okay, they ended up using it only for sharing data. It seemed to be good enough for that. But then on the flip side, we used a different format for sharing rather than for acquiring and analyzing data. And again, I'll come back to that later. So it's basically, you replace one leg or two legs with four legs. And well, I'm sure that that creates a whole lot of additional problems. And then in that second article, there's also, I think that was more of a literary trick. He introduces a little bit this ASDF strawman, which is an astronomy format many of you might be familiar with. He quotes from the ASDF sort of data model document where they talk about what they don't like about HDF5 and why they don't like it. But there is certainly some valid criticism here in that ASDF document when it comes to the archival qualities or the lack of archival qualities in HDF5, and concerns that existed at the time about, well, is HDF5 a file format or is it a library? And then the perceived not instability, but changing nature of both seemingly at the same time, that caused confusion and concern. And then, for example, they ask, will the future library be able to read much older files? Well, we keep emphasizing the forward and backward compatibility and so forth, but that's a whole other discussion. Finally, decisions, it's all about decisions. And at the end of the article, he's basically saying, well, he hopes that he provided you some criteria or some food for thought, I think is the better way to describe it. He certainly provides plenty of food for thought to decide whether HDF5 is the right tool. I think we have to be we should be the ones giving people that kind of decision help, or at least in addition to others giving helpful advice, we should be the first ones trying to give others helpful advice how to use HDF5. And then, but definitely, if you want to embark on this adventure called HDF5, you have to do prototypes and benchmarks and so forth to avoid bad surprises when it comes to showtime. Then he ends sort of this article with this question, well, who needs file formats? And again, he seems to be taking the position and saying, well, do we really need a file format? And is it not sufficient to just sort of cement or codify to a degree an API and then let independent researchers / research assistants take care of the formatting issues? They can format data whichever way they want, as long as they abide by our API and so forth. And then, savvy users tend to prefer keeping control of their data. I'm not sure I buy that, but so be it. But then on the flip side, he says basically, well, if you're dealing with people who just don't want to get involved in all of this, you have to make choices for them and make decisions about file formats and how to lay out the data and so forth. So I'm not saying he offers any solutions. Again, in this article, they are opening many cans and many boxes, and it goes a little bit back and forth between, oh, HDF is bad, but then there are all these other great things, including using file system directory structures and just bare bones Python binary files written from Python and so forth. But then, of course, you can talk about reproducibility and sort of taking that data, sharing that data with other researchers, although we heard already that HDF5 is okay for sharing. So all you then have to do is a tool that packages however you laid out your data in a different form and so forth. So it's not, and it wasn't his goal to offer any final solutions, but again, the the issues that he raises are all valid, and they are not necessarily new, but in that condensed form, I think they are new. So I think what it comes down to in the end is really this, what I would call, for the lack of a better term, the HDF project management triangle, which many of you know, that quality sort of comes together under tension between how much you spend, how much time you have, and the scope, the features of your product or of your effort. And for HDF5, the counterpart of that is a little bit between the data model, the file format, and the library. And for each of these corners being in these extreme positions, I tried to characterize them in a rather sloppy way. So my position is sort of up here. I prefer to look at everything as an implementation detail, but have a clean model. But you don't get much work done this way. You could take an extreme position and say, all I care about is the file format, and then you can tailor your access to that file format. But that, of course, on the flip side, you are doing a DIY library, which I'm not saying is a bad thing, but that's the challenge if you are closer sort of to this corner, or over in the other corner where you don't want to deal with pesky format details. You want to lay things out, whatever you think is the most suitable way for that particular storage type. But then, of course, yeah, your data is not going anywhere other than that data store. And just to sort of vaguely position, just to give you a mental model of this. So we heard about H5 Coro. So to me, H5 Coro is definitely closer to this file format corner than it is to the library corner, because JP Swinsky went out and went straight back to the bytes on disk and so forth. And that's great. And you can get tailored access. You can be very successful for a specific application or application domain. And that's great. That's to be welcome. On the other hand, yeah, if you take the DEAS wall or something like that, yeah, no pesky file format data, everything is in DEAS. And the wall is pretty much the incarnation in sort of saying, what is HDF5? Well, it's more.
Gerd, I think we lost your voice again now. Gerd, we lost your voice.
The data model.
Lost your voice for the last 10 or 15 seconds or so.
Oh, and
no. We are into the question and answer session too, so maybe if we can wrap up.
Okay, then all I want to say is, on the other hand, yeah, being near the center here is no guarantee for being useful, because you have to deal with use cases, and you can view that, if you wish, as a fourth dimension where sort of, if you want to take depth into the screen or sort of distance from the screen, whichever way you want to look at it, that's maybe your fourth dimension where you have to think about, well, for my use case, where do I want to place myself with respect to these three other corners? But anyway, I'm going to stop here, go read the article, and think about how does that apply for your community, for other communities. And we as HDF Group, we definitely have to.
We plan to write our own, right? So people will be able to comment, right, Gerd? Probably cannot hear.
Yeah. Oliver, you have a question?
Sure. First of all, I really appreciate the HDF group taking a look at this. So with Neurodata Without Borders, we're exactly in the space where the blog post came from for developing data standard for neurophysiology. And this blog post has been haunting us for the last 5 years and really has made HDF5 for us a liability, because every time we meet new users, these questions come up and we never have a place to point to saying, here is a proper response for these sort of issues. And so we have been put in a position where we needed to insulate ourselves and design the data standard in a way where we say, okay, we're agnostic to the back end. And while HDF5 is our core backend right now, all our software had to be designed to be able to say, okay, we can integrate ZAR and other backends. We've played around with those, but that meant a lot of burden on us to do additional development, because this blog post and throughout the neurophysiology community, because of it, that was always an issue. And so I would, we'd be happy to provide additional background also on some of these issues in terms of the data management that you brought up. And it might also be useful to reach out to some of the members from that team where that came from. So, for example, the National Brain Initiative has adopted basically that approach because it came out of that group where they have internally their API to manage, and then they use our standard in HDF5 to share the data out. And it's not uncommon that people do this kind of approach. So that being said, we'd be happy to talk with you about, what's going on in that community and also provide some scoping. But we would love to see a response from the HDF group on these kind of issues, because it would tremendously help us.
Thanks. Yeah, I'll be in touch.
Yeah.
Thank you.